5. A friendship is hatched. The transition back into student life was smoother than I would have imagined. It was like my entire existence had been elevated to a much higher plane. Suddenly, I became aware of myself, not as the talented athlete, but more notoriously as the black guy who drove his father's Audi to school and everywhere. Actually, it was more like the father driving his son to school. I just happened to accompany him to the campus when he had a class or a student seminar to attend. In about the third week of the semester, Dad was due to give his first lecture on something to do with marine biology in the Caribbean. It was being held in Peabody Auditorium on the western campus of the university. I decided to attend, not that I thought he would need my presence for moral support. I was more interested in finding out how enthusiastic the faculty and students were for this event. Well, it was quite a surprise. This must have been why the university had invited him as a visiting professor. I entered the hall to find the place packed with students and faculty. There were some students walking in the aisles looking for a seat. I glanced up to scan the audience and noticed a single black face among the crowd, seated a few rows from the back. I'm sure her eyes were on me, as she seemed to have looked away just as I turned my gaze towards her. Within a minute, I was standing over her row, beckoning the 5 white students to move over so I can sit right next to her. They must have thought we knew each other because this was about half of the row that was accommodating my request. It's always a good move when you can sense what white folks must be thinking. Checkmate. Quietly sliding into the chair next to her, he was seated at the end of the row. I calmly said, "Hi, how are you? I don't think we have ever met." "Good afternoon," was the terse response. "I'm Eric Johnston, and you are?" "Gwendolyn, pleased to meet you." "So what brings you here?" Gwen looked at me as if that was the most stupid, ice-breaking question she had ever heard. Why did this guy think any one of us was here? "To hear the visiting professor's lecture," she responded in a deliberate tone bordering on disgust. At that moment, I sensed a bit of fatigue in her retort. "So why are you here?" she rejoined. "Oh, I just wanted to see how well my dad was going to perform." "Excuse me? Your dad?" "Yes, the guy you just said you came to hear." An air of silence descended over our conversation, and I would guess that I did not help in overcoming this somber mood with my next inquisitive question. "Why haven't I seen you anywhere on campus before?" "Because I'm a graduate student. I don't go to undergraduate events." "Oh, excuse me," I thought. This was heading into one of those "your shoes are not big enough for my feet" exchange. Luckily for me, while I paused to close the curtains on my little getting to know you show, the session was being called to order, and the cold silence I was feeling soon started to spread throughout the auditorium. From the way in which Gwendolyn was trying not to look at me, I could feel that she must have been saying in her mind, "This one is a real nutcase." The lecture went off very well. In fact, the question session was almost as long as the lecture itself. At the end, Gwendolyn got up as if she was in a hurry to leave, but the exiting crowd was slowing her down. "Wait a minute, Gwen." I decided to claim a familiarity that the white students around had already attributed to both of us. by shortening her first name, as she had not mentioned her last name. "Don't you want to come with me and meet my dad?" Even more startled, she muttered, "Not really. There are too many people around him right now." The thought flashed through my mind, "Eric, you have got to be bolder." Gently holding her hand by the wrist, I said, "Come on, it wouldn't take a minute." I could feel the hesitancy, but it wasn't that strong. It was enough for me to raise my insistence to a higher pitch. "Listen, Gwen, you have to do me this one big favor. If I don't introduce you to him, I'm going to get the worst tongue lashing you can imagine. It is all going to be about how I sat next to this beautiful young black student and didn't even think it courteous enough to introduce her to him, especially since I know that he wants to meet as many of the black students at Miami." Something in that pitch must have convinced her, because before I knew it, she was right behind me as we burrowed through the exiting crowd towards the podium. Within about 10 feet from his position, Dad looked up and said, "Oh, here comes my son." Most of the crowd turned around and opened the path. As I told you, it is always a sure move when you can anticipate what white folks are thinking. "Hi, Dad, this is Gwen." "Hi, Professor, I enjoyed your lecture." "Thank you." I immediately moved to cut off this encounter. "We have to go, Dad. Gwen has a class coming up." As we moved away, I could read the puzzled look on her face, and in her voice, she must have been thinking how to end this episode satisfactorily. "Well, thank you very much. Yes, you are already having trouble remembering my name. Either I had not made an impression, or the one I made was so overwhelming that you didn't get the name." "Eric," I said with a tone of assistance. "Yes, Eric, see you later," were the parting words as she vanished into the landscaped beauty of Weston College. Gwen was actually from the town of Oxford, and it was quite unusual to find a homegrown person going to the university in the same town. Most black kids would have preferred to leave home for college in some other town or even another state. You can say they shared that much in common with their white counterparts. Dinner at Gwen's house was not a big event except on Sundays, when her family would usually have a friend or two over. This evening's dinner, however, was a little different. Gwen just had to tell her mom about her encounter with this rookie on the campus. As Gwen would tell the story, this guy sounded like one of those freshmen from an inner city like Cleveland trying out his high school pickup lines. He even made 5 students shift over so he can get the seat next to me. Her mom laughed. He must be very interested. Interested. Wait, that was not all, Mom, the tale continued. Then he opened out with, "Why are you here?" Mom, why was anybody there, for crying out loud? So what did you tell him? Well, I asked him why he was here. Gwen, that sounds cold. You're not going to meet new people by responding that way. Ignoring that comment, she finally got to the meat of her story. Then, Mom, he said that he was there to see how his father would perform. What did he mean? What does his father have to do with it? Well, that's the point. The visiting professor's name is Willis, and he is from the Caribbean. This jerk, speaking in his inner city accent, was trying to impress me by suggesting that the professor was his father. Oh my God, he must be mental. Well, that is where the entire thing went right off the rail. At the end of the lecture, He insisted on us going to say hello to his dad. Did you? Well, before we could get within 10 feet of the podium, the professor raised his head and said, "Oh, here comes my son." I tell you, Mom, I don't know what to make of this guy, but I wish he would throw his line at other freshmen like himself. Since I had returned from the hospital, my dad had become so tuned into my emotional state that he had developed that knack for sensing when something was bothering me deeply. Frivolous things did not matter with him, but he appeared singularly focused on ensuring that I was happy in my new environment, and I was. I had no reason not to be. About 1 week after his lecture, he raised the issue about what was concerning me. "Remember that girl I introduced you to at the lecture?" "Yeah, Gwen somebody." "Well, I have not been able to find her anywhere on campus. When I'm going to and from classes, I scan all the faces to see if I would find that charming black face, with no luck. How can someone disappear like that?" "I don't know what you mean. I see her most days of the week." "You do what? And you never said a word? Where do you see her?" "For your information, Mr. Hotshot, she seems to have her lunch at the Western Lodge, just down from Peabody Hall." Now, the Western Lodge was an old, iconic building that represented much of the traditions of the former Western College for Women before it was taken over by Miami University in 1974. It's a pity that most students at Miami University lack the minimum knowledge about this behemoth that today is referred to simply as the Western Campus of Miami University. First of all, this was not a community college. It was started in 1853 as the Western Female Seminary, founded by a pastor of the Presbyterian Church and his wife here in Oxford, Ohio. The early students were mostly the daughters of ministers who had come to prepare themselves for missionary work around the world. In fact, Western College was really one of the pioneers in international education coming out of the USA. In 1894, it changed its name to the Western College for Women, but the building of traditions continued. Its legacy is a fascinating combination of both traditional rituals and architecture. Take, for instance, the 3-day ceremony, started in 1890. This was the students celebrating an annual springtime pageant. The college continued to do so every May until 1956, when the festivities merged with the fall celebration called College Day. This was actually modeled after a carnival held at Wesley College, a women's liberal arts college in Massachusetts. Later on, this 3-day ritual became an elaborate Arbor Day ceremony that culminated in the planting of a senior class 3. As for its social praxis, Western College has written its contribution to the civil rights movement in the summer of 1964. That year, it became the training site for volunteers who traveled to Mississippi to conduct voter registration and establish those freedom schools. At a ceremony commemorating the 50th anniversary of this event, a Freedom Summer Memorial was unveiled, making a beautiful addition to the campus. 3 trees intertwined with architectural structures and chimes were planted in memory of Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Swerner, who were slain in Mississippi shortly after leaving Oxford. No less astounding was its architectural legacy. I remember reading about the tall glass windows of the Western Commons dining hall. the magnificent view of the old stone bridge and the picturesque perfect view framing Cumlock Chapel in the fall. I also remember some former student, I can't recall who it was now, saying how much she had missed the family-style meals, the chimes, and the prayers that began each meal. The writer also mentioned the lodge, where she claimed to have received her first lesson on how to pour beer without having a glass full of foam. The reason why I researched so much information about this institution was not because Dad's lectures and his office were there, but because he had revealed to me that his sister had attended Western College for Women while he was at Miami University. What a coincidence. The lodge is a structure that was built in 1926 from huge cut logs brought all the way from Colorado. Later, it became a recreational hall and a space for catered events. No one leaves the facilities on the main campus at Miami to go all the way over there just to buy lunch, unless you're attending classes in that part of the campus. Are you serious, Dad? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I immediately thought of roping in my riding partner, Michael. We have to have lunch at the old lodge cabin. Of course, you know Michael. He would complain about everything. He wanted to know why we were going for lunch in this old lodge cabin. The place uses an old-time fireplace and it was always cold in there. Just play it cool, man, I insisted. If you see me getting a home run, just exit yourself and let me handle it from there. As we entered the lodge cabin, I spotted Gwen right away, her head buried in something she was reading. She seemed to be oblivious to the fact that her office mate was leaving, which was convenient for me. May I have a seat? She looked up startled. Sure. That was only strike one. The last time I had to move 5 white students over in order to sit next to her. And that conversation was anything but cordial. This time, our conversation was much more pleasant, as she willingly stopped whatever she was reading to engage me in small banter about classes and the weather. We did have a sticky point when I insisted that she give me her phone number so that I can communicate with her again. Actually, I had surreptitiously set my smartphone to the Google app for sharing devices and turned on the scan for nearby devices. It picked up her phone. So I told her that I wanted to send her a picture and that she should accept it. After some argumentation, I said, just press accept, that's all. She did, and it registered her cell number. Game on.